Mario not only boasts a career of platforming and kart racing, but also as the hero of a long-running series of role-playing games. This Mario RPG sub-franchise went through a long hiatus before making an unprecedented comeback. Prior, franchise creator Shigeru Miyamoto infamously had all original characters and stories removed from games such as Paper Mario, along with JRPG elements during the Wii U and 3DS era, when Nintendo tried to homogenize the IP, to the ire of some older fans. It almost felt like an apology when, during the final year of the Nintendo Switch generation, 3 traditional JRPGs featuring Nintendo's mascot were released within just 12 months. A remake of the very first Super Mario RPG, which introduced the concept of a turn-based combat system with platformer-inspired action commands. A remake of the fan-favorite Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, which excelled in storytelling, and a sequel in the Mario and Luigi series with all new characters. That might be a little overwhelming to newcomers, so as a longtime fan, here I'm providing my insights and reviews for all 3. In an era in which role-playing games try to outdo each other in game length, resulting in backlogs of games which take longer to complete than multiple TV show seasons, the first Super Mario RPG from 1996 is a reminder that things can be done differently. The Switch remaster still clocks in somewhere around 12 to 15 hours, but still feels complete and well made. This first turn-based adventure of the iconic acrobat sent Mario through weird and wacky set pieces at a brisk pace, constantly introducing new characters and plots, which received just the right amount of time to be memorable. Later iterations refined this formula, but the original still stands on its own. The dungeons and maps are tightly designed challenges, and even in its most simple form, the action commands give the turn-based combat the right amount of extra engagement. And even though the remake has new aiding systems in combat, I felt that the battles still had decent difficulty for a beginner's RPG. Later sequels like Paper Mario and Bowser's Inside Story introduced more creative characters and plots, but Mario RPG still has its share of unique characters and set pieces, making it quite unpredictable even today. The humor is more slapstick based, with less dialogue than later games, but Mario's companions Mello and Chino have a decent amount of backstory, adding a touch of adventure to the slapstick insanity. Also, as banal as it might sound, considering the state of the world, it's nice that the one serious undertone of this family-friendly comedy game is, you know, making weapons of war is bad. Remakes of Super Nintendo games can sometimes feel redundant, since many of the best 16-bit era titles are still classics with intuitive gameplay and great visuals. But Super Mario RPG might be an exception. For one, the visuals were never that great in my opinion. The old 3D look not only falls short compared to traditional pixel art, but also to other pre-rendered games of the era. Ironically, the remake often captures the feel of those old pre-rendered graphics even better. On top of that, the game back in the day only came out in Japan and America. In Europe, it wasn't released until decades later on the Wii Shop, which is now defunct, and the limited SNES mini console, making the Switch remaster the definitive release of this game over here. The original Paper Mario games were proof that even something like Mario can work with a story. Make no mistake, Thousand Year Door does have a very engaging gameplay loop and a nicely balanced battle system which is beginner friendly but also has just enough depth to be compelling, especially in boss fights. And the set pieces, ignoring some of the blatantly redundant backtracking, offer a good variety in puzzle solving and investigation gameplay. But these things correlate directly with story set pieces and the writing. In the first Paper Mario games, you delve into chapters which are all unique 3 to 4 hour long plots, ranging from conventional JRPG settings like castle dungeons to much more outlandish set pieces like murder plots or Peach philosophizing with a Space Odyssey computer. With that in mind, something like a fighting arena, which would often be a rather ordinary set of battle challenges in other JRPGs, is significantly elevated in Paper Mario by an in-depth wrestling plot, which then becomes a wacky corruption thriller. But even more traditional settings like a deserted treasure island become much more engaging through lots of witty writing and unique characters that are not bound by any franchise guidelines. Compared to later sequels, which weren't allowed to introduce new characters, in the original games you never knew where the journey was going. Anything from Mario's crew being kidnapped by an evil nerd lizard to mafia melodrama was possible. The biggest disappointment when I played Thousand Year Door back in the day was that the mechanics and even progression and puzzles felt very similar to the first Paper Mario. Still, it was a new story, so it felt like it had its place. Now, because Nintendo is Nintendo and they can't help themselves but to always dumb down their old games for remasters, Thousand Year Door on Switch got a new cheat button with which NPCs can practically spoil nearly every step you need to make. While in theory you don't need to press it, it's still so central that it takes quite a bit of wonder out of the investigations. So much so that I prefer the original release, but even that only drives home that the biggest strength lies in the writing and story setups, which are not affected by this kind of handholding. It isn't just the wacky plots and scenarios, but also the dialogue, which finds a perfect balance between irony and surprising wit. If they wanted the Mario movie to not only be financially but also critically successful, the writing of Paper Mario is where they should have taken inspiration. Even if not all scenes are laugh out loud moments, the script always remains a joy to read. Not to mention that this tone perfectly carries over into battle gameplay, which, presented like a stage play, is one big meta gag. Heightened by a great art direction with paper set pieces that feel obviously very cartoony, but still atmospheric, and with lots of inventive character designs, which despite their seemingly simple nature, make for very expressive animations and very distinct appearances. Besides the humorous characters, what sets Thousand Year Door apart is also the more adventurous world building, which features a surprising amount of detail, and I'm not talking about the graphics. There's a huge number of original NPCs which all have little backstories or even their own adventures. Lots of minor characters show up at different places, write you mail and so on. The most prominent example being Luigi, who has his own role-playing adventure in the background. Just the fact that with your research skill you can get small quips on literally every NPC in the entire game makes the world feel alive. This kind of dedication to building up seemingly unimportant characters and optional side locations is rarely seen. Maybe most comparable to some of the Yakuza Like a Dragon games. The main hub world, Rogueport, is actually full of lore and secrets, and slowly delving into its underground depth over the course of the campaign makes for a pretty decent feeling of mystery, on top of the more quirky Mario hijinks. JRPGs sometimes don't have the grandiose writing that you might remember from playing them as a youngster. This is not the case for Thousand Year Door. Its writing is quite timeless. It's aware of its Mario shenanigans, but it's not just slapstick. It's family friendly but not infantile. Despite its wacky nature, the care put into its world building and the variety of its set pieces doesn't just make Thousand Year Door one of the best Mario adventures, but also one of the better JRPGs of its time, in particular the original version. Ironically, despite what the Miyamotos of this world believe, Thousand Year Door is one of the best Nintendo classics, precisely because of its passive storytelling. Originally created for the Game Boy Advance, the first Mario & Luigi game could be considered the true sequel to the very first Super Mario RPG on SNES. It came out after the popular Paper Mario on N64, but it was Mario & Luigi that brought back multiple original Mario RPG developers. Compared to Paper Mario, Mario & Luigi created a series that was even zanier and more over the top with its humor. In gameplay, it introduced the unique element of controlling both iconic brothers other simultaneously, both in turn-based battles and during puzzle solving. Plus, even more than in Paper Mario, the action segments of combat incorporated Mario's platforming routes through skill-based QTEs. After the responsible studio Alpha Dream was dissolved, some feared the end for this particular spin-off, but surprisingly enough, after a long hiatus, a new team took over to create Mario and Luigi Brothership. And ultimately, this gave the series a needed breath of fresh air. The core gameplay loop and the series' unique exploration and combat design are intact, but Brothership also returns to the basics of Super Mario RPG to update the formula, whether by making standard attacks more dynamic or by streamlining exploration controls. Since prior games took the concept of controlling both protagonists at the same time literally, Luigi could get easily stuck if you didn't time both jumps correctly. But since this wasn't a platformer, it created more of an annoyance than a test of skill. In Brothership, it's not possible to lose Luigi anymore, and instead you can send him out to do chores like a lemming. Battles still rely heavily on platforming and active timing, but the sequel slightly changes how leveling up works, making for a different and more dynamic way of combining extra attacks, stat bonuses, as well as buffs and debuffs. More similar to Paper Mario, where the underlying systems are easy to navigate but also provide a surprising amount of tactics, which is needed because maybe it's my age, but some of these boss patterns are a little tough if you don't react quickly enough to the action elements. Instead of a large overworld, Brothership features distinct islands which are essentially different levels with one big goal at the end after exploring either a dungeon or a big puzzle section or a city. This structure is reminiscent of the first Mario RPG, which was also divided into different stage-like locations. The world might not feel as coherent as in prior games, but the concept allows for a variety of backdrops, from jungles and mountains to amusement parks and even a little mystery adventure like in Paper Mario. While each stage is full of little interaction points and gameplay gimmicks, channeling Mario's platforming roots. A much needed improvement was the loosening of handholding. It's not exactly a hardcore RPG, and while tutorials appear even late in the game, they're far less intrusive. The prior development team had a bad habit of making longer and longer mandatory practice sessions for the most simple mechanics, including the act of walking around. Whereas Brothership has tutorial boxes which can be quickly skipped. Not to mention that some Mario and Luigi games, such as Dream Team, wouldn't have a single puzzle left that the computer wouldn't explain to you in detail. Brothership is still a kid-friendly game, but it lets you off the hook faster during puzzle solving and exploration, making these elements more rewarding. But this return to old virtues of Mario's RPG origins and rethinking prior games isn't without its flaws, or rather disappointments. When it comes to writing, it's probably among the weakest and least memorable RPGs in the Mario franchise. It was nice to see a new cast of characters and a new set of locations after Nintendo put those on hold for over a decade, but the writing struggles to keep up with the classics. Old Mario and Luigi in particular had some of the zaniest humor in the series, with many quick-witted punchlines and extremely eccentric characters. Brothership not only returns to the more fragmented storytelling style of the first Mario RPG, but also adopts a more quote-unquote grounded tone. It's a comedic game, but the comedy feels safe and not very inventive. Still good enough for the target audience, because it's not bad per se, but the best Mario RPGs always had genuine laugh-out-loud moments for players of all kinds, which are rare in Brothership. Mario and Luigi before this game never shied away from poking fun at Nintendo's characters, while here their characterization is rather mild. There's a focus on physical comedy through the animation work, but the dialogue isn't on the same level anymore. For example, Bowser as the protagonist in Mario and Luigi 3 was one of the most surprisingly memorable portrayals of a Mario character, whereas no one in Brothership really stands out. Not to mention that side characters in the past came with very distinct distinct over-the-top personalities and were presented with these caricature-like appearances. In Brothership it all feels much tamer. Practically no new characters presented in a similarly over-the-top way. Again, it's not boring, but also not particularly engaging. Often the game even suffers from long-winded exposition dumps that simply aren't interesting. The game aims to be whimsical and adventurous like Paper Mario 2, but that also falls short compared to the sharper writing of its predecessors. Besides that, I didn't really understand this concept of mixing nature with electronics. And because the writing isn't that interesting, while the game is bigger than many of the prior iterations with quite a bit of backtracking, Brothership also feels too long. All in all, you've got a game that fine-tunes an old formula to make it engaging again, under the premise of abandoning some bad habits of old, like the ever-growing hand-holding. Brothership provides a compelling gameplay loop which makes these new combat and exploration scenarios interesting to interact with. But there's also the feeling that something is missing to make it a true classic. As crazy as it might sound, it's the storytelling that held classics like Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door and Bowser's Inside Story together and elevated them, while Brothership just isn't quite there.